My name is Juliet, and I'm just going to give a little overview of Ayurvedic lifestyle, and then we'll customize it for our guest this morning. So I just like to start with the elements because essentially it's just an elemental system. So essentially, the concept of Ayurveda is that everything in the entire universe is made up of the elements, and that includes us, so we're basically constantly interacting with our environment. And I really like this system, which is considered an art and science out of India, because it shows you how you can constantly balance yourself, since we're always interacting with the universe. So you're a little bit familiar with Ayurvedic medicine? Yeah, in terms of yoga and some of the dietary stuff,
yes.
Right? Okay. So it includes everything. So we'll just kind of go wherever the interest is today. So ether and air, which dosha is that? So dosha is just, yeah, exactly. So ether and air is vata. But an easy way to think about it is just that these are the airy constitutions. Airy. Is that how you spell airy? I hope so. And then air and fire. Oh, I think I need to wake up. Fire and water is which dosha?
Pitta.
Yes, Pitta. And these are definitely the fiery people. And then water and earth is Kapha. And they're just very grounded, very watery. Water in terms of emotions is one way to think of it. So we'll just talk about watery. So what's really powerful is the doshas. If you recognize more at a subtle level when they start going out of balance, it's really easy to correct. So does anyone know what it looks like when there's too much air or ether in the system?
Maybe forgetfulness.
Yeah, exactly. So, and also, just I'll overlay it with yoga, since we've been practicing yoga together, Ayurvedic yoga, and it's the same movement regardless of how it expresses. So vata energy comes up in the body and it just kind of disperses in all directions. That's kind of vata. And so that idea that like increases like, right? So too much air and ether in the body, someone could be forgetful, spacey, could show up as worry, fear, and anxiety, constipation, nervous system issues, dry skin. Any other imbalances come to mind?
No. I think I identify with everything you said.
Yeah, which is really helpful because then we'll give you lots of tools on how to treat with opposites, how to balance with opposites. And that's why I always go back to Ayurveda as a foundation for really simple practical medicine, because it's that same concept. It's like increases like and opposites balance. So what are all the things that you can do on your own to keep your system in balance? And like, yeah.
And you mentioned anxiety and also depression.
Yeah. It is, and that can definitely show up as vata. Anxiety is kind of the earlier sign, and then if it's chronic, then it can start fluctuating between anxiety and depression. Kaphas, since their energy moves so much downward, they are predominant depression, but they can get that secondary anxiety. So sometimes it's, these two interacting, but definitely. And then we can just kind of think about the endocrine system and the adrenals and how to rejuvenate. So for Vata, living in the high desert is really challenging, and especially when it's windy. So if you break it down to the gunas, this is going to be dry, light, mobile, subtle, rough. And sorry, to qualify gunas, it's just the qualities. So those are the classic qualities. So Vata is going to be, dry, light, mobile. So that is Vata, and we'll come back to that and talk a little bit more about how to balance it. If I'm over here, that's okay.
Yeah, perfect.
And then fire, energetically, and these movements are all based on prana, which that's a little bit more detailed, but with people that are really pitta and fiery, they tend to be really focused and really forward moving. So to balance, you can lateralize their energy, which is really great medicine for them.
What do you mean by lateralize?
You know how in yoga, when I talk about cooling yoga, we do a lot of side stretches, we do a lot of twists, and so what can happen is the energy is really concentrated in the solar plexus, and so you're trying to do this expansion and contraction to alleviate some of that heat for pittas, since they tend to get overheated if they're out of balance. So, side stretches. So essentially you're working with the liver and spleen, but it could just be as simple as modifying your gaze. So instead of focusing on a single point, you're just lateralizing your eyes, which would take the energy wide. So it's more expansive and cooling. So with pittas, their qualities are they're sharp and oily. They can be really intense. If they're in balance, they're more courageous, they're good leaders. They have a lot of energy, they have a lot of fire, their digestion is naturally really strong. But say for example, this kind of weather, so it's summer, maybe their job's really stressful, they're eating spicy food, anything that makes them more and more and more heated. They're going to hot yoga, at midday, they're athletes, they might be over-exercising, so that's too much fire. Then it's going to show up as inflammation, skin issues, because Pitta, Rajaka Pitta is the skin, so we know there's fire there like we were talking about yesterday. Sometimes it can show up as loose stools, ulcers, dry eyes, headaches, just too much heat in the body. So that's Pitta. So Pitta's, essentially we just want to soothe and cool because they get overheated. They can, and also more from an emotional standpoint, they kind of go from being more magnanimous and courageous to controlling and bossy. That's just an indication Pitta's high. That's kind of how it shows up real specifically for those people. So, just to be consistent, this is what Vata looks like naturally. Pitta is just like a very focused, straight arrow. They just move forward like this. Vata's energy comes up and disperses naturally. So you're always treating with opposites, right? So just for the sake of consistency, that's where we'll start, and then we'll talk about how to balance each of these doshas. And then Kapha, any ideas how Kapha presents itself? What Kapha people? Yeah, they're very slow, steady, stable. They can be a little stubborn, they will not be pushed. They'll just dig in. They're all about structure and earth and water, so physiologically they can be a little bit more solid. Their bone structure is really good. Pittas are more moderate, they've got good muscle tone, and Vatas are just very delicate, they're more about the bones. So with Kaphas, when they're in balance, they're kind of like the earth mamas, they're just really sweet and gentle. They're very methodical, they'll start something and they'll go step by step, kind of cover all the bases. They have a lot of ojas, a lot of juiciness and lubrication. They're very yin with the earth and water. So that means, they have a lot of reserves. That's the word I'm looking for. So they might be, like I have a lot of Kapha friends, and as I'm talking through these, you guys might be thinking of attributes in yourselves or other people that you know. So Kaphas, they like to sleep in. They love their coffee, they kind of roll out of bed, they're not very hungry. They are slow metabolically also, so they usually, if they're balanced, they'll eat 2 times a day because it takes a while to digest their food. So, it'd be like, hey, let's go for a morning run. Pitta and Vata would be like, oh, that's a great idea, we'll get up early and go for a run. Kapha would be like, yeah, sure, that sounds fine, they're really easy going. And then they would just sleep in, blow it off, So if you can get them out there and get them moving, they will outlast and outwork everyone because they have more endurance and more reserves, but they're slower to get started. So same thing, in terms of learning, I feel like our schools are pretty Pitta, everybody can form and learn this way. But really, Kaphas, those kids they're gonna learn a lot slower. It takes them longer to absorb and digest. But when they get it, they've got it. They'll be the ones that they really remember it, they understand it, and they can explain it really articulately. Pittas, they get it pretty quickly and they forget it. They're moderate. They'll get it and they'll forget it. Vatas, they get it really fast and they don't hold it at all. They don't hold it. Kaphas hold stuff really well. Which, in terms of, if you think about that same concept of increases so say for example, Kapha's just eating regular food, regular diet, but they're the ones that are going to hold all the extra weight. So if they're not really careful and exercising and having an amazing healthy diet, they'll tend to put on weight because they build naturally, and then they'll have diseases of excess showing up like edema, diabetes, obesity, high cholesterol. Why can't I say this word all of a sudden?
Cholesterol.
Exactly. Cholesterol. It sounds really weird this morning. So that's what coffee's for. Which coffee's best for Kaphas. Only a little bit for these two, not very often. And yeah, high triglycerides, so all of those things. So we're always trying to lighten up Kapha, cool off Pitta, and ground Vata. So Kaphas, their energy just moves down naturally. So they might love slow yoga, restorative yoga, yin yoga. It feels really comfortable and natural, but we would actually want to be treating with opposites. So we try to get them to a more dynamic class where they're really, sweating and challenged. Kapha is cool, Pitta is hot, and Vata is cold. So you can also think about that in terms of their medicine. So Pittas, we would want more of a cooling, vinyasa, lunar type of class to cool them off, and then Vata, anything that's grounding, hip openers, restorative. So that just kind of paints a brief picture, but I think what's fun is let me address any questions. And then also, if you guys have any questions about yourselves or people that you are interested in assisting in any way, we can just kind of do a little Q&A and customize it, because that's where the practical application is the most interesting and, in my opinion, the most fun. So anything else that we missed about these attributes or any questions on any of these doshas?
Yeah, you mentioned yoga for Pitta would be what type?
It's kind of like that smooth, fluid vinyasa. That's just what comes to mind.
Yeah.
What do you think Ashtanga Who
For
would that
Kapha.
balance? Yeah.
Kapha. I never stand though. But it's
Well,
not good for me.
You know, it's not that so much, but what you can notice is people are drawn towards what they already are, but what balances them is what's opposite of them. Like you're trying to cultivate the traits that you don't already have, which is really challenging, and it's not our natural tendency. So, just as an example, like Vatas, that are light and lean, they have a hard time building. They're very, you could think of it in terms of, they're very catabolic. So these guys are the ones that are the runners. Like they're always moving, they're running. They're good at it, of course, it's very natural to them, but it's really hard on their body. It's not their optimal medicine. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Pittas, they're like extreme sports. It's like, I'm already intense, what's the most intense, thing that I could do? They're base jumping and racing cars and racing motorcycles, and it's like, oh, fun, So it is fun, and they're probably going to be really good at it, but over the long term, it's too much fire, and then they can get burnt out. Too much running, and then they can get dried out, or too light, or too emaciated. And then Kaphas are just like, I'm just gonna hang out and watch an awesome movie. You guys go have fun. Like that would be natural for them, right? Or maybe they'll go swimming. They're really drawn to what they already are. Not that any of those things are inherently bad. It's just the moderation part that's hard, because it's like an addiction. And then to treat with opposites at first, it doesn't feel natural. But once people get started, they start feeling so much better. And that's the hardest part, is like the beginning, right? So, Ashtanga is not necessarily bad, but what I would do is just really notice how you feel. There's a lot of upward energy, so it's very Pitta Vata. So it increases Pitta and it increases Vata. Brings a lot of lightness and fire into the body and the mind. So maybe if you really love that, you could do something to balance it, like oil massage, meditation. So you're always going to be bringing in something else to find the balance.
Right. But since now I have a skin condition, maybe it will aggravate my pitta.
It'll definitely increase Pitta. The only question is, in what manner? So this is where it really turns into kind of an art. There are 40 different Agnis, or fires in the body. So then you work with an Ayurvedic practitioner, or you just experiment. It's like, I go to this class, I sweat, I get fiery and light. How does that show up? Maybe it doesn't affect this Pitta. Maybe it affects a different Pitta. So you just kind of have to experiment with it a little bit, or have, a really comprehensive, diagnosis, basically. So, does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
It could affect the digestive fire.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you could always use cooling oils or substances on the face to keep the face cool, like cilantro or neem or cucumber or aloe vera. Just do something more topically and local. So there's so many different tools that you can bring into your toolkit once you have like a basic understanding of the doshas and the elements and how they interact. Yeah. Good questions. Any other questions? What about balancing Vata? We should talk about that.
Yeah.
Right? So we've got our Vata, so their medicine, is just to focus and ground, right? Pittas is to disperse that heat from the midsection of liver, gallbladder, spleen, third chakra, solar plexus, however you want to think about it. And then Kaphas is to really bring the energy up and out, remove some energy and create some heat. So for Vata, we should just talk about what we could really implement that would be useful for you. So, you know, for your home yoga practice, we were talking about hip openers, because basically you're thinking about the pelvis and the first and second chakra. So hip openers, balance poses, really slow, rhythmic grounding, deep breathing. Make sure you're in a warm space for Vata, like no breezes, no fans. Vata doesn't need more movement, they need stability. And a really slow practice, so you hold the poses longer. Yeah, so it's almost like in restorative, those types of practices. Less movement. Yeah. Definitely, you know, root lock. Yeah, we were talking about. Yeah. So that is just a very brief overview of Ayurveda and some simple tips on how to apply different, you know, yoga practices or thinking about the climate where you live. You know, Vata's going to do really well in somewhere like Hawaii, you know, because it has moisture. Or even here right now, since it's monsoon, it's moist and it's warm. So you can think about your environment, your clothing, aromatherapy, like everything that would bring this person balance. You know, Pitta, the climate that they, you know, can really thrive in is it's going to be a little bit cooler, maybe like the Northwest. So there's tons of blue water, there's tons of green trees, it snows in the winter, and it kind of keeps them from getting overheated. And in terms of color therapy, they're getting all this cooling blue and green and white. You know, color therapy for Vata is everything that's grounding. So I kind of realized when I lived in the Northwest many years ago, it was autumn, so everything's brown and gold and burgundy and dark green. It's like, oh, that's Vata balancing. And the season is dry and light, right? So the wind is blowing and the trees are all naked. But nature has these colors that kind of balance that season. Those colors are very soothing and grounding and, you know, saturated and warming. And then Kapha, where we live, you know, it's dry for most of the year, so high desert. Elevation is a little bit higher, and it's windy a lot. It's often windy, so they get that movement and that stimulation. So, and it's warm to warm them up and bring lots of fire into them, which they don't have much fire naturally. All of us have all the elements, but some of us are just more predominant. So, any questions? Okay, great.